Emergency pod. Charges have been dismissed in one Title IX sexual assault case against former head coach Art Briles and former athletic director Ian McCaw. Let's talk about it. This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in and making it your first listen today and every day. This is Locked On Baylor. Maybe it's your second listen today because it's a bonus pod. I'm Cam Stuart, and I'm here to talk about just one of my favorite topics, and that's the 2016 sexual assault scandal revolving around the Baylor football team that led to the firing of Coach Art Briles, athletic director Ian McCaw, and the late former university president, Cam Stuart. And today, some more news coming out in the district court here in Waco that the charges in the Devin Chafin, Dolores Lozano case have been dropped against Ian McCaw and against Art Briles. They have wiped their hands clean of that one. And to be honest with you, it's not that much of a surprise. Now, let's kind of make this whole thing clear. This is one case of obviously a much broader, a much bigger institutional failure at Baylor in 2016 or the years leading up to 2016, which led to Art Briles and Ian McCaw's firing. There was obviously a lot of other cases that have been brought up, sexual assault, rape cases against Baylor football players with the institutions knowing. Two of them have been found guilty, and now this is Sean Oakman was found not guilty back in 2019. And with this particular case, this does not mean that there was no assault. We don't know necessarily all the facts of that case yet. I'll get more into that in a little bit in a minute. Again, this is former running back Devin Chafin and his then girlfriend, off and on girlfriend, Dolores Lozano. And this is just saying that Ian McCaw and Art Briles did not show gross negligence in the handling of this case. And this, like the others, I think more fall on the university and the institutional failure there, and not necessarily, although there is some blame for some of the other cases, on the athletic department and with Art Briles in particular as the head football coach. So that's kind of the recap. They were in all week. They have been dismissed of those charges, so they will not be there as the trial continues into next week. Again, Dolores Lozano is still trying to prove negligence on behalf of Baylor University, and that an assault did happen. Now, that is a little muddy, from the details that we've heard. Devin Chafin, who was in a deposition earlier this week, said that it was actually Lozano assaulting him after she had gotten an abortion, which would have been Chafin's kid. And it sounds like from his deposition that it was Lozano's mother that forced her to get it. And Lozano was mad that he didn't stand up to her parents, and she had a bit too much to drink, came to his apartment, made a scene, and had actually assaulted him. But she's claiming assault against him. So we don't know how that is going to play out. We still don't know all the events of that night. That's just what we hear from Chafin's deposition. And it's another, it's kind of weird to call it this, but a win for the Briles team. And again, it's not too shocking for me, at least, that he's found not grossly negligent here. Overall, the overall situation, this is my personal opinion, the overall situation in the scandal that happened at Baylor, there is some negligence on Art Briles' plate, on Ian McCaw's plate, on Ken Starr's plate. Obviously, can't do much about that anymore, but on Baylor as an institution in general. And thankfully, from all accounts that we see, Baylor has improved that and has changed the Title IX discourse that they have. But Art claimed in court this week that he didn't know anything about Title IX guidelines. And honestly, I can buy that. There weren't a lot of schools that had big Title IX guidelines. Baylor, I think, was the first one after that to have a full-fledged Title IX office. I think there were some other things that he did wrong in handling these situations. But in terms of this isolated one that we're going to talk about today for the emergency pod, I don't think there was enough there to say that Briles and McCaw were totally negligent. And McCaw actually uses the phrase in there, the athletic department is not an investigative body. partially true. This is what's, I think, so interesting about not only this case, but the sexual assault scandal in general is there's so much gray to this. And I think with me and a lot of Baylor fans, we're living in that gray. And what I mean by that is it's not 1,000% Art Briles' fault. It's not 0% Art Briles' fault. There are so many players in this, no pun intended, but just in this whole saga, right? And as we've been able to tell, if you trust the justice system, and I understand if you have some skepticism, that it's an imperfect justice system, of course, but if we trust the justice system and what's went on over the last 7 years now, some of these assaults happened. Some of these assaults Baylor knew about. Some of these assaults the coaches knew about and probably did not go through the proper channels. Some of these, according to the justice system, did not happen or did not hold the weight or did not have the evidence. And, the staff did not know about it or the athletic department didn't know about it. And in this case, this Devin Chafin, Dolores Lozano case, that seems to be the latter. It seems to be, we don't know what happened yet. That day in court has not been played out. That will be next week. But in terms of what the athletic department knew and how they handled that, it seems from everything we've heard in the depositions and, of course, the opinion of the judge in this case, that they did not mess this one up, basically. And first off, I got to say, I've been following with a lot of the local news, more so than like an ESPN. And I got to give credit where it's due. My former employer, the Baylor Lariat, the student newspaper, which gets a lot of flack, has done an excellent job. And namely, Jenna Fitzgerald, who has been reporting. She has been in the courtroom, detailed accounts of the depositions, of what Art said, of what he was questioned on what McCaw said. I highly recommend going to the Lariat for this one, actually. I mean, this is really detailed. You really get a sense of being in the courtroom, who all the players are that are involved. And it's really thorough and excellent, I think. And more getting away from this particular case, but Art Briles in general, the term scapegoat gets used a lot. Sacrificial lamb, being at Baylor, the largest Baptist university in the world. Is he a scapegoat? By definition, by the very definition of the word, yes. Art Briles is a scapegoat. I don't love saying that because I think the connotation of a scapegoat is Jesus, who did nothing wrong, right? But sat on the sword or literally died on the cross for us. Art Briles is not that. He's not. And the football program is not that. He basically falls on the sword to save those around him. And essentially his firing from the Board of Regents is, we don't want you anywhere near our football program. And that's fine. I mean, just because he's not being charged with gross negligence or those charges are being dismissed against him does not mean there was a bad culture in this football program. It does not mean that he didn't not handle some things very well in some of these other cases. And it does not mean he should be the football coach at Baylor University. Doesn't mean that at all. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of people that were involved in this who are still working and still working in college football, at major college football. And Art kind of sat on the sword for that one. And he doesn't have a career, at least in the United States. He is coaching in Italy. And that's fine. Trust me, I'm not losing any sleep over that. But it definitely seems like, from what we've heard in the past, in some of these other cases, there's a lot on the plate of Kendall Briles, his son and the OC at the time, and on Jeff Levy, who is his son-in-law, and another assistant coach at the time, now at OU, obviously, and Kendall at TCU, and as well as with strength and conditioning coach Kaz Kazadi, who's also now in the same position at TCU under Sonny Dykes. In fact, Kaz comes up in this story basically with Art saying, whenever we would hear something like this, we'd have our punishments in the football program, which was handled by Kaz Kazadi and would include things like going to early workouts or doing some extra sprints or lifting some extra weights. And winging a prayer, those young men will learn a lesson. And that is just crap. That's crap. Again, this is the gray area, right? Anything that happens like this, like an assault, like a rape, that needs to go to the police right away. And for some of these, that is what happened. I agree to Ian McCaw's point that at that juncture, it is not on the athletic department to investigate this and to prosecute this. That said, if we are just making guys run wind sprints after hearing these kinds of allegations, that right there is the problem with the football program, or what the problem was at the football program, in the football program. There needs to be suspensions, or you take the kind of old school route and let the process play out. That's understandable too. It's not necessarily what you see in this day and age, but it's better than running wind sprints. So, Art Briles, the scapegoat. It feels weird to say because, again, he's not, his hands are not completely clean of this scandal. We haven't seen, necessarily the results of the Pepper Hamilton report still all these years later, but we have seen some of the texts between him and Kendall and Jeff Lebby, and there absolutely were some crimes that the football program knew about based on what we've seen from those texts, or at least some wrongdoing that the football program knew about, and some that they did try to handle themselves. So he is a scapegoat in that he took the blame for something that was an institutional failure, and a failure within his program and other people in his program. But he is not innocent. He is not guilty in this case, but he is not an innocent man in all of this. And I've said from kind of the beginning, if we're doing a blame pie here, a good bit of it goes to the university, because these are women who came to the university after these alleged assaults happened and presented their case and what happened to them, and mentioned that it was Baylor football players, and then it just seemed to go away. And that's a failure. That's a failure in every sense of the word that you cut it up. I don't care who you are the biggest defender of. Baylor failed here. I don't care how much you love Baylor. They failed hard. And this particular one just doesn't happen to be on Art Briles and Ian McCaw as much as it is on the university. So that's why the charges are dismissed from those two. And there are still, like I kind of mentioned earlier, there is still part of this trial that is left. I mean, we have not proven anything on what happened that night, and I believe it was March of 2016 between Devin Chafin and Dolores Lozano. Definitely, from what we've seen get out into the public, let's just say it seems different from what it was originally portrayed as. Certainly from Devin Chafin's deposition of what he had, or what he said happened. We have not seen Lozano take the stand or heard what she has said in this case in terms of the trial. So is Art Briles innocent in this whole thing? Again, no, I can't stress that enough. He is not innocent. But in this case, I'm not surprised by the judge, Robert Pitman, dismissing the cases against him and Ian McCaw. Recap. Sam Ukwachu, Tevin Elliott, guilty, and heinously so. And in those cases, Baylor guilty, and the football program guilty. Sean Oakman found not guilty. That case, we got a lot in the public eye on the evidence in that case, and that was kind of flimsy from the beginning. And this one seems to have the same tone, but we don't have as much of the evidence presented publicly that we did in that case. So that's something to keep an eye on. Again, I would love to get her on the show, but Jenna Fitzgerald for the Baylor Lariat had just such an in-depth look at things. I mean, again, it really feels like you're there in the courtroom, from hearing from each individual lawyer, hearing from Chafin, hearing from McCaw, hearing from Briles, It is a fascinating read, a really detailed read. The biggest thing that comes out of this for me is ghostwriters, man. Y'all were exposed. Y'all were exposed big time. Oh, Art talked about that he gets basically cross-referenced, cross-examined about some things he said in his autobiography, which was published in 2015, 2016. And he said, no, that was with is it Don Yeager? Because, of course, it says written by Art Briles with Don Yeager. That is a ghostwriter. Actually, not technically because his name is on there, but Yeager wrote the whole thing. And Art said, I don't know what you're talking about because I didn't even read it. I don't know what you're referring to. So ghostwriters are the big losers in this one. Sorry about that. But it's just another, I'm bringing this up again. It's a painful chapter for Baylor football, for those of us who were there at the time. It was just not a pleasant time to be around Baylor. We are not the victims in this. Don't get that twisted, but it opens up some things when these come back, and people like me who were there, got to talk about it again. But there is some positives here in that, okay, there's one less body in terms of the Baylor athletic department that we love, that you as listeners love, that didn't totally F this one up, which they did in some others. Now, again, institutional failure, absolutely. So we still need to get to the bottom of that. But hopefully there wasn't an assault that took place. But again, we don't know. We don't know. So I appreciate y'all listening for this extra pod on a Friday. We are going to revisit this next week. Again, the trial will go on next week, and we would love to get some people who are in the courtroom on the podcast and kind of do a more in-depth look and what stood out to them, and seeing these people in the courtroom, I think is a big thing of just the emotion of it all, right? Because we get the deposition and we get it all written out, and we can learn a lot through that. But there is something to having that human emotion and being in the room. So would love to hear some more about that. But yeah, just to recap, Ian McCaw, Art Briles, not guilty or not negligent, I guess is actually the right term in this case. In fact, before we go, let's look at what Pitman said there, because I think that's, obviously his opinion is what matters here. And he says this case was always about Miss Lozano getting her day in court, which is true, of course, but that he can't say with any certainty that Ian McCaw and Art Briles had any gross negligence when it comes to this case. No reasonable jury can conclude that they were grossly negligent, is the exact quote. And just reading some of the other quotes here, Dolores Lozano's attorney, Sheila Haddock, said, the judge said this has always been about Miss Lozano having her day in court, and we agree. The judge granted Baylor's motion solely on the issues of gross negligence. He denied the remainder of Baylor's motions, and we look forward to presenting our case to the jury on Monday. So that's, again, reinforcing the point that this is still an active case. This is not over. There will still be people that are getting cross-referenced, cross-examined. God, I keep saying cross-referenced. But just in terms of this case, they were not grossly negligent. And then we heard from Reed Simpson, who is Art Briles' lawyer, and he goes all in on this, saying everything that's said about him is not true. And Art was apparently pretty emotional when this was happening. And when asked if Friday's ruling would help Briles' reputation in the wake of the investigations in 2016 that led to his firing, Simpson said, quote, I hope it helps. So again, I don't think this wipes away all that happened. I don't think Art will, he'll never coach Baylor, of course, even though some people legitimately want him. I don't think he's going to coach college football again. And the Baylor attorney, Julie Springer, also spoke, which is what I'm interested to hear about, because I think this is it's going to fall on Baylor more than these people. Obviously the intrigue around us sports fans is on Ian McCaw and on Art Briles, but again, this is a Baylor thing. And she said, quote, there is no question that bad things happened and mistakes were made at Baylor. Baylor accepts and accepted responsibility for those failures. This case is not one of the cases in the investigation's findings. In Dolores Lozano's case, Baylor got it right. So that is interesting, because the attorney is right. Baylor has accepted responsibility for some of these. It doesn't cover up how they failed at the beginning, or cover up the cover up of how they failed at the beginning, if you will. But they are not accepting this one. They are fighting this one. And it's going to be really interesting to hear next week about, kind of right after the alleged assault happened, what channels they went through. So that's going to do it for today's Locked On Baylor. Thank you so much for making it your first listen today and every day. We're going to have we're going to talk about football tomorrow. We're going to do the post game for Baylor Cincinnati, as well as probably break that game down on Monday. And then hopefully, I'd love to hear at the beginning of next week if we can get more in depth onto this case a little bit, just so that you guys aren't just seeing the memes on Facebook or the memes on Twitter and just second and third hand things. I'd love to talk to people in the courtroom rather than just me sprouting what I've heard or what I've read in these stories, but just hopefully trying to give a bigger picture to this, give a better idea of what's going on and how this will shape how we view all that came out in 2016. Again, still obviously assaults and rapes that did happen and that Baylor failed in, but this one remains to be proven and could change how we kind of view some of this. So again, thank you for making it your listen today. I'm going to get out of here. It's a Friday. It's Friday afternoon. I'd love to just move on to some other things, but wanted to make sure that y'all get the full picture in that. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then.